to the Porter's Farm application, and we hand over to Charlotte to make the presentation to the case officer. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Chair. This application was considered by members in April who were minded to refuse permission for the proposed development. The risk assessment procedure was invoked, and the members will note that a subsequent risk assessment report now accompanies the original officer's report. Given that that was a couple of months ago and that we have a new committee make-up, I will go through my presentation again in full. The application proposes the change of use of land at Porter's Farm in Chedburgh to a wellbeing centre offering mental health support specifically, albeit not exclusively, for healthcare workers. The application proposes various outbuildings, a central hub building, 4 holiday let domes, and as well as the associated infrastructure. Before we go into the presentation, I just have a couple of matters of housekeeping. In the last couple of days, we have received 4 additional representations for the application. They are 4 letters of support. They have been summarised on the screen for you there. 2 of these are from local residents, which offer support to the services provided, as well as expressing their support for the proposed location. They stress the importance of the facility and consider the proposal to bring prosperity to the village. The other 2 of the representations are from West Suffolk residents, both of which worked for the NHS and have been given support by the applicants after suffering extreme difficulties with their mental health. They both refer to colleagues who have also received such life-saving care and commend the work of the applicants. So those are on the website, but even though received late, you may not have had the opportunity to read them in full. So moving on to the presentation. The application site is shown on the left-hand image there in a dark orange colour with the housing settlement boundary, the red line shown around it. So as you can see, whilst the host dwelling sits within the village envelope, a fair amount of the site sits outside of it within countryside. Residential development bounds the site with Chestnut Crescent to the south and dwellings fronting Queen's Lane to the north and west. This plan shows the existing site, and members will remember from the site visit that the site benefits from 2 vehicular accesses onto Queen's Lane at the front, with a gravelled parking area within that access. Porter's Farm sits centrally within the frontage and is Grade 2 listed. To the rear of the dwelling sits a disused swimming pool and tennis court, as well as various outbuildings and animal enclosures on the southern boundary. And after this point, the site opens up into 2 distinct clearings. Boundaries comprise mature trees and hedging, such that views in and out are limited. I'll move on to now the proposed site plan, and this is shown in 2 parts given the length of the site. So if we start at the front, you can see the Porter's Farm sitting at the front, and this will be retained as a residential dwelling with an area of private amenity space to the rear. A replacement domestic garage is proposed at the front in place of the existing one. And the accesses that we have will be designated an in and an out access to manage vehicles within the site. The existing swimming pool, which we have here, will be covered and used for storage, and the tennis court that's proposed in the middle will be removed to make way for the central hub building, which is shown in this location here. And more details of which I'll have on a further slide. The existing outbuildings that we have here and the animal enclosures will be removed and replaced by new buildings within the same footprint. So we can see a new driveway is proposed, and this moves down through the site with some additional buildings here on the southern boundary, and it stretches into that central clearing where we move on to the next site plan. You can see a proposed car park is within that end clearing behind this row of trees, and then we have 4 holiday let domes proposed at the rear. The holiday domes are proposed for short stay holiday lets, either in connection with the Wellbeing Centre or for independent use. This is the hub building. So this is proposed as a communal space and will be used for group workshops. The applicants envisage hosting these with additional specialist support up to 3 times a week with groups of approximately 12 people. The workshops will allow group discussion and activities, as well as an opportunity for time in the individual therapy suites, time with the animals, or within the garden areas. Just to move on, we have a visualisation of that proposed building. Whilst it does have a large footprint, it's modest in appearance, with natural timber elevations and a zinc roof. Solar panels and an air source heat pump have also been designed into the scheme. I talked about additional buildings within the site. And there's a plan and image here of a therapy room as well as an office, which are proposed on the southern boundary. And I'll move on. This shows the existing animal shelters within the site and their location there on that southern boundary. And these are the proposed replacements. You can see they sit on the same footprint. They are single storey in height. We originally had windows proposed on the rear elevation of this outbuilding, and they have now been removed to protect residential amenity, and we have windows on the opposite side facing into the site. The buildings will be upgraded from their current condition and will provide improved acoustic insulation. There is a photograph on the left which shows the existing garage which serves Porter's Farm at the front of the site, and again that is to be replaced, and you can see the plans there of the new proposed building, as well as another of the additional outbuildings proposed to the rear. And this plan shows you the 4 holiday domes that are proposed. They have a panoramic window to them, which you can see on that first image, which would look into the site, as well as being fitted with a curtain to prevent additional light spill in the evenings. So some photographs of the site, just to remind members after our site visit. So this is the Grade 2 listed Porter's Farm. You can see the image from the road on the left hand side, and then the image on the right shows us the rear elevation of the building. And these are a couple of photographs taken from deeper within the site. I referred earlier to the 2 distinctive clearings within the site, and the snowy scene on the left is the central clearing. When we carried out our site visit on Monday, I pointed out to members where the overhead line was in terms of the positioning of the hub building, which would sit within that space and within the area where the tennis court currently is. The image on the right shows you the far eastern clearing. You can see that rear boundary, and that's where the holiday domes are proposed. So the photograph here on the left-hand side is a view from sort of the central area of the site, and it looks through that existing tennis court, and you can just see Porter's Farm in the background there. The image on the right-hand side is a CGI that's been produced to accompany the application, and it shows that same view. As you can see, tennis court removed, you have Porter's Farm in the background, and then the edge of the hub building on your right-hand side. So this is looking in the same direction, this is looking west. So Porter's Farm is right at the bottom, it's quite difficult to see it there, but you can see the hub building on the right-hand side, and then we've got the therapy room, and the office room, and then the animal pets therapy building on the left. And again, the left-hand side photographs, the top photograph shows you the view from the house at the moment into that rear garden, and then the bottom view shows us that proposed driveway running along the right-hand side, and then the area in front of this photograph here, so behind the house, would be retained as the applicant's private garden. Images on the right-hand side, at the top we have the existing view of the house and that parking area, and the image to the bottom shows you what this will look like when we have this new driveway proposed within the site. The consultation responses are shown within the officer's report, but I have just summarised them there for you. So just briefly going through those, the conservation officer has looked at the application because it's within the curtilage of a listed building. She has raised no objection and considers the development to enhance the immediate setting of that heritage asset. Public Health and Housing have no objections. They have recommended conditions which form part of the recommendation in your papers. The Environment Team are satisfied that there is a low risk for land contamination. The Environment Team, in respect of air quality, recommends conditions in terms of electric vehicle charge points, and they are included within the proposal. The Highway Authority, no objections again, and has recommended various conditions. Place Services have looked at the landscape impact. They acknowledge the limitation of views from the site, from outside of the site into it, and they acknowledge that enclosure, but recommend a landscape and visual appraisal, which also considers the nocturnal character of the site. They've made suggestions in respect of planting and colours of the holiday let domes, as well as hard surfacing within the site. And they have recommended conditions in respect of those, as well as hard and soft landscaping and management of that. Place Services in respect of trees. They note that the trees proposed for removal are all Category C or Category U, and therefore there are no objections to their removal. We have 14 replacement trees proposed, and they are satisfied with that, subject to a condition which includes details of the species of those and their location. In respect to ecology, they are satisfied with the ecological surveys, and again recommend a condition just to secure the mitigation and enhancement measures included within that report. The Suffolk County Council Archaeology, again no objection. Suffolk Fire and Water, no objection, and they confirm that no additional water supply is required. And Anglian Water, who have confirmed that Chedburgh Water Recycling Centre has sufficient capacity for the flows from this proposed development, and they are happy that the connection is acceptable. So in terms of representations, our ward member, Councillor Chester, noted the local interest and concern in respect of the application, and originally called in this application to committee. Chedburgh Parish Council raised no objections but did note a number of concerns. Again, these are within your papers. We have objections received from 14 local addresses. They largely concern overdevelopment, the wrong location, given that there's no facilities within the village, impact on the listed building, residential amenity, light pollution, air pollution, traffic and parking issues, impact on trees and wildlife, drainage, law and order, and concern that it will set a precedent for future development. Letters of support have been received from seven local addresses, noting the need for the proposed facility, the positive impact this will have on the village, and consider it will have a minimal impact on local residents. In terms of policies, there are a number of policies which will relate to this application, and those are included within the papers. I have picked out the key policies here, just to remind us what we need to consider within this application. So DM5 at the top, which concerns development in the countryside. It allows economic growth and enterprise subject to not significantly adversely affecting best and most versatile agricultural land, the historic environment, character and visual amenity of the landscape, nature conservation, biodiversity and the local highway network. DM15, which concerns listed buildings. DM34, which looks at tourism development, seeks to direct visitor accommodation to sites that relate well to the main urban areas and define settlements, and can be made readily accessible to adequate public transport, cycling and walking links. And similarly to DM5 above, it allows developments that will have no significant adverse impact on nature conservation, biodiversity, or the character and appearance of the landscape. DM41, which expresses support for new facilities, including healthcare facilities. And then we have the Rural Vision document. This concludes a number of aspirations for the district. It acknowledges that health services have limited resources and that community groups and individuals need to take on increasing responsibility, particularly in rural areas. And that is summarised within Aspiration 22 of that document. And then finally we have the National Planning Policy Framework. Paragraph 92 states that planning policies and decisions should aim to achieve healthy, inclusive and safe places which enable and support healthy lifestyles, especially where this would address identified local health and wellbeing needs. Now, in April, members raised concerns in respect of impact on the countryside, overdevelopment, impact on residential amenity, and impact on the listed building, and they were minded to refuse the application on those grounds. The risk assessment report considers these as potential refusal reasons, and it advises against refusal on the grounds of impact to the listed building and on residential amenity, given that we have support from both the Conservation Officer and Public Health and Housing. Therefore, should members remain minded to refuse, a refusal reason based on the more subjective issues of overdevelopment and countryside impact has been drafted, and this is included within your report. Notwithstanding that recommendation, officers still need to weigh up the considerations and plan balance for this application. So we have a table in front of us, and under the negatives we have the fact that the site is located largely in the countryside and it's not supported by landscape and visual appraisal. And there will be a degree of urbanisation of the site, given the need for a driveway and car park to support the proposed use. Whilst overlooking is not considered to be an issue, local residents will likely be aware of activity within the site, including the associated traffic movements. Looking at the positives, the buildings and layout proposed represent high quality design. Utilising natural muted tones and sensitive placement of buildings, they appear unobtrusive and respect the heritage asset in rural location. Removal of existing dilapidated structures will enhance the immediate setting of the listed building. The proposal meets the aspirations in the rural vision and the National Planning Policy Framework to provide health services in rural areas and address local health and wellbeing needs. Whilst a landscape and visual appraisal is suggested and is a useful document for development in the countryside, this site is entirely enclosed by established landscaping, such that, in the officer's view, the proposed development will have no impact on the wider landscape character or the internal landscape features of the site, with replacement trees proposed for those removed. Furthermore, ecological enhancements are proposed, as well as mitigation to ensure no harm to ecology. I will add on at this point that we have one additional condition proposed, and given that one of the benefits of the scheme is the improvement to the animal shelters, both in terms of their appearance and their improved noise insulation, it seems entirely reasonable to propose a condition which requires those animal shelters, if the application is approved, to be erected in accordance with the plans prior to first use of the hub building. So should members be minded to approve the application, that condition would be added onto the list of conditions we already have. So, notwithstanding the minded to refuse recommendation we had at the last committee, it is officers' recommendation to the committee that the application is approved with the conditions you have, plus the additional one on page 14 of your papers. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Charlotte. Right, we turn our attention in committee now to the public speakers. Just run through the list. We've got Winifred Evans. Welcome, Winifred. You're an objector, and you've got 1.5 minutes. Agreed? I think then we've got an audio file from Mr. and Mrs. Alderton, and Helen will be playing that for 1 minute and 30 seconds. And then we've got the applicant, Matt. The applicants. Matt is the architect. Welcome, Matt. And plus John is the applicant. And you're going to share it between you. So who's going to start and who's going to finish? You're going to start, John. Okay, thank you very much indeed. In that case then we'll turn our attention back to Winifred. You've got your 1 minute 30 seconds, Winifred.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm speaking on behalf of a number of people in the village, but in view of the time constraints, these are bullet points and go hand in hand with the next submission. As pointed out in the last meeting, the plan is an overdevelopment of the site and not clear on people numbers, animal numbers, building measurements and operational times or days. There are also many inconsistencies between what was said in the village meeting, the last planning meeting, the public pack and what's in the planning documents themselves, concerning employee numbers and the pods being used as holiday rentals. Although John said at the last planning meeting they would only be used for retreat accommodation, the online planning documents say they're to be used for retreat accommodation or holiday rental. The public pack recommendation also differs to those of the local council and what was agreed at the village meeting. For example, the days and times that deliveries can be made. All documents state that mitigation must be carried out. It will not make up for the disruption and distress to the village, locality, the wildlife and the mental well-being of neighbours. In short, it's to the detriment of the village, bringing increased traffic, noise, light and air pollution, sewage and drainage issues, and with the loss of habitat and the threat to wildlife. Please could our councillors reflect the issues and wishes of residents and again reject this application.
Thank you very much indeed, Winifred, and well timed, may I say. Okay, we turn to now the audio file from Mr. and Mrs. Alderton, which are also objecting to the application. Over to you, for none. I'll say 90 seconds.
While the intentions are commendable, Daughters is in a slummy residential area, and the change of usage for commercial well-being and leisure facilities will result in mobility.
It's very quiet, sorry. Just help.
Bearing in mind, members, we've got this new technology.
That's very clear.
The ambitious construction of more new buildings, more commercial ground proposed with car parking spaces is a large-scale development and completely out of keeping with the quiet village setting. The proposed central hub is over 4.8 times the size of our property, and the positioning of it is less than 12 metres from the property boundary, means it will be clearly visible from our garden and house. The noise and light generated by the usage of this building will spoil our family's enjoyment of our property, which is in a quiet and rural setting. It will be just 1.2 metres from the lodge boundary, another neighbouring property. The hub will be clearly visible from our property and will in turn overlook ours, which will be worsened by the removal of trees on the boundary line. The hub is 95 foot long and 26 feet wide, but the applicants have stated it will only be used by 12 people at any time, which has made us question the need for such a large and imposing structure. This could be mitigated by positioning the hub further away from the listed building or reducing the footprint and height.
Yeah, okay, we'll play that again if members want. Yeah, might be clearer. Would that be helpful, or did you hear it clearly, members? Councillor Smith, did you?
You're fine.
You can hear it fine, so that, okay. If anyone wants to hear it again, put your hand up. Okay, that's fine. Thank you very much indeed. Okay, good. Right, John, then it's your opportunity, and you and Matt collectively have got 3 minutes, and so it's Matt that's probably going to lose out, I would have thought, by the time you get to the 3 minutes, but over to you, John.
Good morning, councillors. Thank you for your kind attention. We do appreciate this is an unusual planning application to consider. My wife Laura and I, who see here behind me, together we have 39 years experience of working on the front line of the NHS as nurse and doctor. This was all at the sharp end, intensive care, emergency department, trauma, resus. We healed very broken bodies. More recently, we've switched instead to healing broken minds. In the last 4 years, we have looked after well over 100 people in our home and garden, all in our own time and all pro bono. Initially, most were healthcare workers, many clinical staff, but actually we've supported a full range of staff from domestic all the way through to executive director level. More recently, we have been helping more and more people from outside of healthcare background, including many from our local community. We do coaching, counselling, life skills, coping strategies, mindfulness and hypnosis. At Pets Therapy, many who are rescue animals themselves help us with this. Sometimes all people need is a safe place to cry, a cup of tea, a chat and a hug. Others require much more. So far we have supported 8 suicidal people. To date, all are still alive. Sometimes Roy and I return home and find someone sitting on our doorstep, rocking and crying, waiting for us to return to help them. Honoured councillors, as people who pay attention to what is going on in the world, I'm sure that I don't need to state in detail the widespread growing mental health crisis that is everywhere and is not going to end anytime soon. Support provided in natural settings is proven to be more beneficial and lasting results in institutional environments. It's also aligned with GP social prescribing where local options are limited. Laura and I don't like the term land because we see these units more as retreat accommodation structures with well-being central to the core of what we're trying to achieve. The accommodation gives visitors the opportunity to stay and fully immerse themselves in healing activities available. Any spare capacity is then made able to support low-level peaceful tourism surrounded by nature, which is therapeutic in its own right.
Thank you. Previous committee discussion allowed us to hear various perspectives of the members, including support for the ethos and principle of the application and those with concerns for the impact of the countryside and neighbours. We've listened to this feedback and provided an additional post-committee statement that this application is a result of a wide variety of consultees and has resulted in a high-quality scheme in terms of architectural design, supported by the Conservation Officer, improvements for biodiversity, minimised impact on trees, noise management, drainage management, both surface and water. Our application is for a desperately needed facility. This facility will support some of the local heroes of the district who need opportunities like this to manage their mental health and stress, to enable them to continue to provide the services that all of us require from them. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Right, it's over to the committee. Councillor Chester, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to thank the police officer for a very comprehensive presentation and the public speakers for their contribution to the debate. These notes that I have here follow on from comments that I made at the previous DCC. I repeat some for the benefit of new members. I know the applicants well and their desire for a wellbeing centre to help fellow health professionals, a role they've been unofficially fulfilling for many years, a role for which there's a growing demand with the Lord of facilities. In many ways, what they seek is a noble task. Likewise, I'm aware of the objectives' fears and share the concerns over the potential impacts of this proposal may have on their lives, and mine as well, as I live locally or not as close as many of the objectives. This application was refused at the previous Development Control Committee meeting, and consequently the decision-making protocols invoked, revealing the potential risks to West Suffolk Council for refusing a largely policy-compliant application if this is refused today and yet overturned on appeal should the applicants decide the appeal route. What's proposed is ambitious, perhaps overly so, both in scale and design. Porter's Farm lies within the Chedburgh settlement boundary, but the proposal is largely an open countryside with housing very close by and is served by a narrow lane. The application doesn't sit neatly within planning policy due to the conflict with the development of the countryside, which is tightly controlled. However, the officer recommendation is firmly in favour of approval, and I urge members to turn to page 12, section D, which gives you more detail on that. Of the many consultees, and more importantly, none of these consultees have objections. The consultees no objections, and the 24 and now 25 planning conditions and the risk assessment weigh heavily in favour of supporting this proposal. Also on page 13, item 36, which is at the top of the page, of the risk assessment, alludes to the need for supporting mental health. And I quote, the applicants have provided a clear and justified need for supporting the mental health needs of healthcare professionals, amongst others. And this is frequently in the press, and the council's refusal of such a scheme may have reputational impact if not fully justified. And that's caveated below by item 37 that even though this forms part of the risk assessment, it's not material planning consideration. So I have a question here. Can officers clarify whether support, if any, from any recognised official third-party health sources have been sought or confirm on need or given support for this facility in this location? That's the question. And my concerns remain are a lack of definition between the two key elements of the wellbeing centre and a tourist facility, which are both worthy of separate planning applications. The scale of the hub building and the impacts on residential community and the village through such a large proposal. And also, and this may not be a mature consideration, so the service management planning may challenge me on this, how the programme of works will be managed for the initial road access to build complete and final landscaping. Does the proposal need to be complete in its entirety before the first use of individual elements, i.e. the use of polylets without wellbeing centre? As ward member, I have a duty of care to give an indication to residents the duration of disruption. In conclusion, the facility that achieves the aim of helping health professionals promotes limited tourism is laudable and worthy of support, but I have concerns regarding the location. I have greater concerns about the potential long-term and ongoing disruption locally to a quiet residential area. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Chester. Councillor Hyde, please.
Thank you, Chair. Excuse me. Yeah. Two things really. Just one observation and then one question, please. It was said that there were no objections from Highways. but there were conditions. But I think it's, and I know this is semantics, but there were no objections subject to the conditions, and I think that's an important point. Obviously, I didn't hear this before, and I've read the papers, and I know that before, Councillor Chester was concerned made by residents about the inadequate sewage system, but that's not been mentioned today by anybody. So can you clarify whether or not those concerns are valid, and if anybody has actually provided any reports or observation on those facts, please?
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Neil, please.
Thank you. There's a big lack of mental health facilities in our communities. We're all fully aware of that, and that's why I'm quite taken with this application. And it's not just serious mental health. People are suffering from depression. They need time out. They need an overnight stay. They need a bit of respite from the troubles that they're in. And so it concerns me that part of this application, it says holiday lets. I can't see how it can be a holiday let. I appreciate the necessity for an overnight stay for the respite. A presentation from the applicant, he mentions the fact that he's come home and there's been people waiting on his doorstep. He's got 4 don'ts for overnight stay, so I would assume he would only ever be wanting to have 3 of those occupied at any one time, just in case somebody turns up on his doorstep, as he says. I made a note about the fact that it is helping National Health Service workers, and we need to have support for them wherever we can. It's a countryside location, and I see that as a positive rather than something that's negative. If it's secluded. A question about the choice of animals, because in the presentation I saw a pig. I don't know, perhaps you can get great therapy from stroking a pig, but I'd like to know the choice of animals, because the smaller the animals, the more easy they would be to manage, and the less impact they're going to have with farmyard smells, etc. So I'm mind to support it, but I'm open to the debate. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Neil. Now, Councillor Davidson, please.
Thank you, Chair. I've been to this site again for the second time on Monday, and it hasn't changed my opinion really, but I think this is a really good use of the site, and the very much needed service that's being provided. The majority of the site is well hidden from screening vegetation. It was existing on the ones that planned to be planted. I can't see any overlooking onto the local neighbours, and the height of the building is single story. It's not going to be any higher than the ones that are currently there. It's also an inward looking site, so it's looking on itself, it's not looking outwards towards neighbouring properties. I think it is minimal impact, I believe. The residents will say otherwise, but from what I can see and what I have seen on the site, I can't see how it would have a significant impact on the local residents, and I will have to support this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Holder, please.
Thanks again to the officer for taking us through that very thorough way with the schematics that we see. I went on the site visit, the early one before the change of administration. However, today's presentation has helped me a lot. I also use the opportunity because you go out to a strange place that you've never been to before, and you think, what's going on here? Not understanding the mental health issues, fortunately not suffering from them, but also fortunately being one of the many here today and actually are lucky enough to live in the beautiful Suffolk countryside and work there or to raise their family there, but certainly enjoy it. A lot of people don't have that benefit and don't have that privilege. And I do know commercial places like Forest Holidays, for instance, in the Thetford Forest area, they are well frequented by people coming up from cities who just are blown away by the fact it's the peace, the quiet, the tranquility. So it's got to be good for just an ordinary person's mental health. So if you are suffering mental health issues, it's got to be even more important. I checked on various websites about these sort of places, and I just did not believe how many places there are in the UK offering these sort of facilities. And there are many private businesses, and a lot of them have been running for a very long time. But even further afield, I can say this with fact, because when my brother took his family to one retreat in southern Spain, which is just like this, away from the madcap crowds and the bad news and the living crisis, all these sort of things that pile up on people. So seeing this in this context and listening to the applicant and his knowledge of these problems, so it gels my thoughts. My initial thought was, what the hell, why are we doing this out in the middle of nowhere? But I see now why, because I've done the research, I've heard the words, and I'm wholeheartedly in support of it, and I know there may well be other speakers, but I'm quite happy to propose acceptance of the facility with the conditions that have been applied and added today. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Holden. I need to secure a seconder for that motion. Has anyone prepared a second? Councillor David Smith. You've spoken. Do you want to speak any more at the moment? Okay. Councillor Smith. Okay, now just to reassure members, I've got Councillor Hood, Marlborough, White, London, and after that I'm going to ask. Now I've got Councillor Rossett and Councillor Hall. But I still might take a break after Council of London to get some responses from officers in all fairness, which may help. So Councillor London, please.
Thank you, and thank you for the comprehensive presentation. We're obviously all sympathetic to mental health issues and want the best for people in that regard. But I think we're also sensitive to residents' comments. And so I have a couple of questions. 36 on page 13 and 37. In 36, it refers to the fact that there's a need to support mental health matters. But then going to 37, it says, whilst it's important to understand these issues as part of the risk assessment process of the section, this section of the report does not form part of the planning assessment of the application. The information does not constitute a material planning consideration and should not be relied on or cited as a factor for coming to a decision. So it would be helpful if you could explain that, because we seem to have a lot of comments about that. Having listened to the presentation, I'm also concerned because, to me, it does seem to be urbanisation. It doesn't seem to meet the rural vision, which you had put under the positive. So I wonder if you could just explain that. And there's a statement that there's no harm to ecology, which I have trouble accepting. So further explanation about that would be helpful. And the resident who spoke against the application has highlighted a number of inconsistencies, like reference to a retreat, holiday lets, and other members here have talked about the sewage and drainage, and there appears to be a significant objection from residents, which it's no secret I believe residents should be listened to. But if you could explain my question, my concerns, that'd be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wood. Councillor Marlborough, please.
Thank you, Chairman. My two concerns are A, the size of the therapy building. I do question the need for size like that, and to say that it would be unobtrusive. It's a very dominant building, I would say, right in the middle of the countryside, because it is extending beyond the housing settlement boundary. And my other question really is, are we running a tourism visit here, or are we looking at mental health issues? Because I can't quite see somebody in need of peace and quiet being in a pod next to a family with 2 or 3 children who are there on holiday. So, to me, that has not been clarified enough. Is it going to be a tourism business if they don't have enough mental health need? Or is the tourism business just going to fall to one side and it will be a mental health therapy place? But to try and run the two together does seem to me a little bit in conflict with what they're trying to achieve on the mental health issue. So I find that difficult to clarify in my mind that you could have the two together. And I do have concerns about the size of that therapy building. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Van. Councillor London, please.
Thank you very much. In the interest of time, I'll give this as a list of bullet points. First of all, with the glamping pods, I was unable to find anywhere any mention of the opacity of the non-window parts of the pod. With the lights inside, there were some concerns from local residents that they might be visible, but I don't know how much light will be coming through the sides of the pods and whether that's going to be lit up or whether that's going to be more like a wall structure. Secondly, I noticed that Planning Constraint 21 talks about out-of-hours deliveries at the front of the building, and I thought would be concerned about having out-of-hours deliveries. I think deliveries should reflect the quiet and rural nature of the area. There's also, and pardon me if I've just missed it in the report, I couldn't see any comments about the fencing around the outside. Again, there were comments from local residents worried about residents wandering out into the countryside and exploring and ending up in private lands surrounding the site. Currently, at the back of the site, it's just some very old twisted barbed wire, which I assume would be replaced as it would not be suitable. But again, I couldn't find any reference to that within the documentation. Something else I couldn't find reference to is the total expected number of people on site. So for health and safety, for fire, etc., there will be certain maximum persons allowed in the various buildings. I think it would be a useful number for us to be able to get those and aggregate them to find out what the total number of persons on site, what the absolute maximum would be. Finally, as a couple of comments, this seems to be very much in the wheelhouse of planning policy DM5. It does seem to be the kind of thing that is allowed in policy DM5, and I would just advise my colleagues, or not advise, say to my colleagues that if we find that this is not the kind of thing that we want as a development in our district, then the problem is not with an individual application, it's with the policies that are being used to make those decisions.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Glossop, Councillor, I am going to go back to officers, and then obviously you're next on my list. Thank you. So over to you, officers, to respond.
Thank you, Chair. Bear with me as I go through my list. So Councillor Chester had asked if we had sought views from the NHS in respect to this application. We do consult the NHS only on larger scale applications than this, so we don't have the ability to get a response from them, so I don't have anything from them to support this application. We do have a condition which requires a construction management plan to be submitted, and that would look at how the construction would be managed in terms of vehicle movements and timings and duration for that. We don't, however, have a condition which controls the phasing of the site, apart from that latest condition which I'd added about the animal shelters. In terms of the sewer system, it is an issue which was raised by local residents. The application is supported by a flood risk assessment and sustainable drainage report, and that confirms the site is within flood risk zone 1, which is the lowest risk of flooding. They have designed permeable surfacing within the site, so the driveway and parking areas would be a permeable surface which would then retain some of the water to slow the surface water to slow its flow into the surface water drain at the front of the site. In terms of wastewater, Anglian Water have responded and said they are satisfied that the water recycling centre in Chedburgh can take the wastewater from the site. And there's a sewer at the front of the site. I think there's 2 underneath the front driveway. So we are satisfied with that. That complies with our drainage hierarchy. There have been queries from several members about the use of the site for holiday lets as well as the wellbeing centre, and I think the main use of the site is proposed as the wellbeing centre, with the domes providing retreat accommodation for people who might be coming for workshops on several days. That, as I understand it, would be the main use of the domes, and if there was any leftover capacity, that would then be available to be booked as a holiday let. In terms of the business plan, the site has to fund itself, and so having another form of income stream from some holiday lets, I think is the reason for the applicants proposing that. From a policy point of view, we do have policies which support tourism in the rural area, and so from officers' view, it is an acceptable usage to have within the site. We have a management plan condition which asks for further details to be submitted, and this would provide us further information of the use of the site and some rules of the site, if you like, which then would be made available to people staying in the domes. So nobody would book the dome for a holiday without being fully aware of what happens at the site and the rules they would need to abide by to be there. In terms of the animals that are on site at present, I can't tell you how good pigs are for offering mental health support, but the animals that are on site, I think, have been collected as pets, and they have been rescued. I don't think they have been recruited for the proposal. And there are 2 pigs on site, which we saw on the site visit, but otherwise the animals are much smaller generally. I will pass over to Rachel to answer Councillor Hood's query about paragraph 36, and then I'll perhaps just work through the next questions.
Thank you, Charlotte. Yes, I think so if members wanted to look at page 13, the top 2 paragraphs, paragraph 36 and 37. They are the sort of last 2 paragraphs of the section that's been titled risk assessment, and we could have probably written it slightly clearer, but paragraph 37 is basically saying that the risks that we've outlined in those paragraphs can't be taken as material considerations when you're coming to a decision on the application itself. So it wasn't intended to read as though mental health or health care provision is not a material consideration. So I'm sorry if that's been slightly misleading in the way that we've written it.
certainly the provision of development for community facilities, which could include health and mental health, is a material consideration. It's these paragraphs about risk, reputational or cost risk, that are not material to the weighing up in the balance of the merits of the application. So hopefully that's a bit clearer.
Thank you. And I know, Councillor Hood, you'd also talked about the potential conflict with the rural vision and our countryside policies. And we do have policy DM5, which I touched on earlier, and that does explain that we have to be careful about the development that we approve within the countryside, but it does include various criteria that development can meet in order for us to consider it to be acceptable. And in this case, hopefully it's clear within my report that we've gone through those issues and we're satisfied that in this case we don't consider the application to have an adverse impact on the countryside. The reference to the rural vision also referred to the need for local healthcare facilities, which I think I had included. In respect to ecology, we do have an ecological assessment which accompanies the application, and that was further assessed by the Workplace Services team, and they are satisfied that actually the development proposed won't have an adverse impact on ecology. And we have to be aware that they're the experts, and I take their advice on those matters. In terms of inconsistency, we as officers and as councillors, we are determining what we have in the application before us. It's difficult when, if you're relying on what people have said and people saying in different meetings, but we have in front of us scaled plans which show clearly what we would be approving. And then in respect of the domes, they're not solid material, but I'm not able to tell you the amount of light that you would get through them. I've been working on the assumption that not a great deal of light would come through. The Workplace Services team have asked for them to be a forest green colour, so which would be a darker colour. So I would anticipate that would help to restrict the lighting, and having a curtain that went across that sort of clear glazed area would certainly help with that. In respect of deliveries, we do have a condition which says any deliveries after 6 o'clock would be to the front of the site. So I don't imagine there will be lots of deliveries, but I mean, Amazon delivers everywhere now, so if you had something like that, they would deliver to Porter's farmhouse rather than going through the site. Fencing, we don't have any details of fencing along boundaries. I'm not sure whose those boundaries belong to, whether it's the applicant or whether it's the adjacent neighbours. It's something we could potentially look at as a condition if members wanted to do that. And in terms of expected number of people on site, the applicant has said they would have a maximum number of 12 people attending the workshops. That would be in addition to the 2 applicants and potentially another member of staff who would be running those workshops. And then with the domes, we have 2 slightly smaller domes which can accommodate, I think, 3 to 4 people, and then 2 larger domes that were 4 to 5 people. So we can do sort of a rough estimate of how many people we would have on site, but again that would be included within the management plan which we've recommended as a condition. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rachel. Before I go to you, Councillor Watson, I just want, because there were a lot of questions asked and a lot of feedback from officers. Are members comfortable with the response? I mean, it doesn't mean you might like the response, but at least has it been addressed? Yeah, everyone comfortable? Okay, good. Councillor Glossop, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I don't think I've changed my position on this from last time. I do think it's very ambitious. I know that John and Laura are going to be doing a lot of the work with mental health corporate patients, perhaps that's not the right word. I do want to know how many staff are going to be there. I know you have just talked about how many staff will help with the workshops, but we have a large site there, so are there going to be staff to look after the site? Who's going to look after the animals? Who's going to be cleaning the pods? We have a lot of things that we haven't really got the answers to. Also, we've got 25 conditions. So I think to get through 25 conditions before you can ever manage this site or start this work, that concerns me. So is this ever likely to get going, actually? Is there anything else I want to ask? No, I do worry about the business of having people who can rent the pods and people who could be staying in the pods if they're there for workshops or help with their mental health. So I'm still very unsure about this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Glossop. Councillor Ball, please.
Thank you, Chair. I wasn't at the previous meeting. I went on the site visit on Monday. Very disappointed not to meet the emu. One of the things that concerns me was something Councillor Romain White raised, was the size of the therapy centre, which does seem enormous, the number of people they are talking about. And really just a comment, the conservation officer talks about any harm being caused to the listed building is less than significant, but that still means there is harm. I think it's a really poor phrase, but it's the one that's used. But at the same time, having said that there is harm, the building's going to enhance it. So I find that a real conflict. But I think the other thing was a practical consideration, probably for someone who keeps animals. There's mention about acoustic provision from the neighbour's point of view, from the noise from the animal thing, but no mention about where any used bedding is going to go or anything like that. I gather, I think the site said there would be a compost heap. Well, I don't think used animal bedding is the sort of thing that's going to rot down in a compost heap with the urine and stuff like that. And there are problems with that, as also contamination of waterways from the drainage from that. So I'd like to know how they're going to deal with that, because you don't want it on a boundary for the neighbours. It would be a bad situation.
Thank you, Councillor Ball. Councillor David Smith.
Thank you. Yeah, just on the point that has been raised about compatibility of hiring a business letter with the mental health well-being side of it. Obviously, there's going to be a cost element to this. At the moment, the service being provided free, pro bono. But going forward, that's not sustainable. There's costs to run a place like this. The NHS is littered with ventures where we have private health, we have NHS health. I think mainly the dentistry system. So this is not unusual to have a business venture alongside something that's more the free of donation, if I'm saying that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. None of the members of the panel wishing to speak, so do you want officers wishing to come back on the questions? Thank you.
Just in terms of the additional staff, I think the applicants have said there would be opportunities for part-time work for cleaning of the pods and for providing catering to the workshops. But I think this is going to be fairly minimal. The applicants at the moment manage the animals and they manage the site, and that's why the workshops would be they're proposed 3 days a week rather than sort of every day. Again, the management plan would set that out more clearly. The phrasing in terms of the impact on listed building, it refers to national planning policy, and that's how it is phrased within that less than significant harm. So it's acknowledged that there will be an impact on the listed building, because of course there will be, but they don't consider that to be significant, and that the national guidance sets out how we then consider that. And just in respect of animal waste, there is composting at the moment, which I understand is used. I haven't been able to get hold of our public health officer, who I've spoken to outside previously this week, but there will be a need for a licence from us, from our public health team, in respect of the animals, and that will cover issues such as that, as well as risk assessment and insurance. So that will be dealt with separately to the planning conditions.
Thank you, Charlotte. Right, any other members of the Parliament wishing to speak? Councillor London.
I was having an orange as well to bring this up. This is me showing my newness to this body, but I have a couple of questions, which is, are we, as part of the management, are we able to set a condition with respect to management plan limiting the number of people on the site? Is that something that is possible? That's a question for our officers. And a second question for our officers, is the question of use of the site for NHS mental health versus holiday camping a material concern?
Right, thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak? In this case, I shall go straight back to Charlotte.
Thank you, Chair. So one question was about, are we able to limit the number of people on the site at any one time? I don't think there's a planning reason that we could do that. If, for example, we've got the Highways Authority saying this site is only safe if there's only ever a maximum of 20 people on the site, that there might be a reason to, but we don't have any evidence to suggest that that would be necessary to make this development acceptable. And I've already forgotten the second question. What was the second question? Oh yeah, the question about health provision, is that material?
Yes, you can.
So specifically the question with regards to, we have the two sides of this, we have the glamping side, we have the NHS health provision, but is the use of the site for one or the other, or a mix, a material consideration?
Yes, we need to consider the proposed use of the land and how the land is developed. I think in these sort of circumstances where there might be two things going on, it's always worth going back to first principles and looking at what the actual application is for, which is for a health hub. The applicant has explained that there may be some ancillary use for holiday lets that's, I would say, would be an ancillary use to the primary use that's been applied for. In policy terms, both are considered to be acceptable, but if we were led down the line and this turned into a holiday camp and not a health retreat, we would go back to the first principles of what has actually been applied for, which is a health retreat. Thank you.
Councillor Chester.
Councillor London mentioned NH health provision. I'm not aware of any connection to NH health provision with this site, just for one clarity and order. Is that correct?
That's right, it's not NHS provision, it's a private proposal.
Well, right, so Councillor Miller-Jones, I think you beat everybody. Councillor Glossop, you're coming back as well. Put your hands up again if you want to speak. Councillor Glossop. And then just before I go to Councillor, I just need a private 2 seconds of correction, please. particular point of clarification, I'm a bit rusty. Councillor Miller-Jones, please.
Hiya, yes, so, that's really loud then. I was quite surprised at how unobtrusive this seems in relation to all of the complaints and concerns. I think given what it's being used for, the fact that it's to help people with their mental health, which is, as far as I can see, the best possible use of the space, it seems to me that, you know, with the site plan as it is, with everything we've heard, with the officer's recommendations, it doesn't look like something that would be a problem, even if it was being used purely commercially, you know, not for anything that was actually benefiting the community. But on top of it being such a good plan, it's also something that I think we can all agree is extremely important. So yeah, I'm surprised about the level of objection, and I think it's a brilliant idea.
Thank you, Councillor Miller-Jones. Thank you. Councillor Dawson.
Yeah, I'm a little bit unsure now, because if we're going to have people without mental health issues, there is obviously degrees of mental health, isn't there? We have heard, we're not quite sure how the site has occurred. So, given things that have happened recently with people who've gotten out of the facility who have had mental health issues, that is worrying me as well. I don't like to bring it up, but it is an issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Blossom. Councillor Hood, please.
Yes, thank you. I wasn't a member of this committee when it decided that they were minded to refuse this application. So I'm coming to it fresh, but I respect what happened before. And there were members did resolve, and it's on page 8, to refuse this on those 4 grounds: the impact of the setting, which we've heard it will affect the rest of the building, the impact on the neighbourhood community, we've heard the objections, overdevelopment. The officers have said that one of the negatives is urbanisation and the impact on the countryside. I just wonder if the officer could again say why those still don't stand, because the risk assessment seems to say, as we heard from Reginald, that the matters set out there shouldn't form part of the planning assessment of the application. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Wood. Councillor Dicker, please.
I have listened to both sides of what's been said today. I was at the application, I think, in April, and for me the proposal is very laudable, what is being looking to be done and how people will be cared for. However, it is very much a large piece of land outside of the development boundary, and for a member that covers 4 rural communities and seen, I will say, some devastation to one of my settlements with overbuilding in the countryside, it's something I don't feel I can support. I think the ideas are great. I like visiting and seeing the animals, but I go back and say there's so much of this site is outside the boundary, and that really means something to me. We can make any of our policies, if we desire to point at a certain direction, if we want something to be accepted. And I keep seeing reasons in DM5, and I also see it the other side as well. And probably the fact that I do cover rural areas, I'm more inclined not to support this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dicker. But no other members at the moment indicating they wish to speak. To be honest, my proposal as chair is to get the responses from officers, and if it doesn't prompt any new questioning, then we go straight and test the committee's mood on this application. Say for one matter, and I'd just like the proposer and the seconder, there was a question about the boundary treatment. Charlotte did allude to the fact that she could condition the boundary treatment, but that came after your proposal and your seconding of that proposal, Councillor Smith. So if you could just consider that, and I'll come back. Unless you want to respond now, Councillor. Okay, I'll come back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So, just in relation to Councillor Hood's point and the previous resolution that members were minded to refuse, and they were minded to refuse on 4 reasons: impact on the listed building, residential amenity impacts, concern about overdevelopment, and impact on the countryside. And I would just draw your attention to page 13 again, and the section E conclusions, where basically within there, advice from officers is that we don't have any evidence to substantiate reasons for refusal relating to impact on the listed building or residential amenity, particularly given that we don't have objections from our consultees who are experts in those fields. But having considered the other 2 points that were raised by members at the previous meeting, we have suggested at paragraph 41 a refusal reason that relates to the other 2 issues, which were about overdevelopment, urbanisation, and impact on the countryside. So that's the conclusion of the risk assessment report based on those 4 original concerns raised by members at the last meeting. But notwithstanding that, and given the details in the report, the recommendation remains to approve the application as detailed on pages 14 and beyond. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. So, Councillor Smith.
Just happy with the treatment of the boundary fence, but just mention people escaping to the community. This is not Broadmoor.
Okay, that's good. Can I just, I'll come back to you, Councillor, and if I can just go to Councillor. Are you comfortable as the proposer to include a condition on boundary treatment?
Yes, indeed. I'm sort of remembering on my site visit that one side is bounded by a stream and a lot of rough ground. You've got open fields at the back, and there is some fencing on the other side. I just wonder what sort of fencing the neighbour seems to want in a rural setting like this. I don't think, as Casper has said, is that we're going to have people running all over the countryside from this side. It's a place for quiet reflection and enjoyment. The fact that you're not going to take a family of 4 kids or even 2 kids to a place where there's nothing for them to do, which is being said, there's no facilities in the village. Obviously people live in the village and the surrounding hamlets and quite happily without village facilities. So, I think people are overthinking this. The applicant has made clear what his intentions are for the place. There's nothing against, you've got an empty tramp, why not let it? It's a commercial enterprise. And people will go and enjoy the countryside of Suffolk. I think we're getting into ourselves to try and find reasons why we shouldn't let this applicant have his day, really. I think we're being unnecessarily bad about it. The fact is that I can't really see this is going to affect anything, traffic, neighbours, or anything. It's just going to help certain people and allow people to have a break from, the madcap life that we all have to lead nowadays.
Thank you, Councillor. In the context of the condition of this, would be a general open one, looking for approval.
Yes, Chair, it would be a condition that requires details of boundary treatment to be submitted, and obviously from a landscape impact point of view, we would want to ensure that that was appropriate to the rural setting of the area, as opposed to what wouldn't envisage a 2 metre close bordered fence going on the other side. It needs to be appropriate to its rural setting.
Thank you, Rachel. And Dare I say, members, I'd like this to be the final comment. Councillor London, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'd just like to, as the person who brought up fences in the first place, strongly distance myself from any thoughts about a fence being used to keep people inside the site. It's just simply about delineating the side of the site. I was envisaging something along the lines of a 3-bar fence, something along those lines. Nothing such as what was intimated previously.
Thank you, Councillor London. Right.
Can I ask a point of order?
Councillor, yes.
Sorry, just... if one wants to have a recorded vote, well, there's one... can one have a recorded vote for this? Because I'd like to request one if we can, please. But I don't know when to do it because I'm new.
It's okay. I've never had to preside over one in this committee. So...
Yes, thank you, Councillor. If you would like a recorded vote, this is the time to request it. But you also need 5 people to support you, 5 others. Yeah, that's in the Constitution.
And do we have to stand up?
No,
just
there's no requirement to stand up.
So that needs to be. So, Councillor Hood needs 5 others or 4 others?
5
others. Right. Can I have a show of hands? Sorry, Councillor.
I didn't realise there needed to be 6 people to support a recorded vote, and so I'm happy not to have one.
Just withdraw.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I didn't make one. Anyway, yes.
No.
That's fine. Very nice. It's just clarification.
Yes.
Thank you.
Right. On that basis, then, we have a proposal in Councillor Holder's proposed approving the application, and that was seconded by Councillor David Smith, and that was in support of the officer's recommendation, which was for approval. So could I see a show of hands in favour of approving the application, please? And those against, please?
So we have 10 votes in favour and 6 votes against. The motion is carried and the application is approved.